Devaya. Om Namo Bhagavate. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudite Nastabrahmeshu Badrishu Nityam Bhavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shlokir Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtikni Pratikya Chitan Chitavo
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Word to word. Pratikriya, remedial measure. Na, there is none. Yasya, of which. Iha, in this material world. Kutaschit, by any means. Tarhichit, or by anyone. Prabho, O my Lord. Sa, that. Esha, positively. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Kala, eternal time. Sarvesham, of all. Na, of us. Samagatah, arrived. Translation. This frightful situation cannot be remedied by any person in this material world. My Lord, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as eternal time, Kala, that has approached us all. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai. There is no superior power which can check the cruel hands of death. No one wants to die, however acute the source of bodily sufferings may be. Even in the days of so-called scientific advancement of knowledge, there is no remedial measure either for old age or death or the death. Old age is the notice of the arrival of death served by cruel time, and no one can refuse to accept either summon calls or the supreme judgment of eternal time. This is explained before Dhritarashtra because he might ask Vidura to find out some remedial measure for the imminent fearful situation, as he had ordered many times before. Before ordering, however, Vidura informed Dhritarashtra that there was no remedial measure by anyone or from any source in this material world. And because there is no such thing in the material world, death is identical with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as it is said by the Lord himself in the Bhagavad Gita 10.34. Death cannot be checked by anyone or from any source within this material world. Hiranyakashipu wanted to be immortal and underwent a severe type of penance by which the whole universe trembled. And Brahma himself approached him to dissuade Hiranyakashipu from such a severe type of penance. Hiranyakashipu asked Brahma to award him the blessings of immortality. But Brahma said that he himself was subject to death, even in the topmost planet. So how could he award him the benediction of immortality? So there is death even in the topmost planet of this universe. And what to speak of other planets, which is far, far inferior in quality to Brahmalok, the residing planet of Brahma. Wherever there is the influence of eternal time, there is the set of tribulations, namely birth, disease, old age, and death, and all of them are invincible. Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Shashwin and Hare Krishna Hare Govind Prabhu. Thank you for reading the text and purport. Prabhuji, we hand over to you now.
Sure. Thank you, Mataji. It's nice to see you back. Hopefully you'll share the nectar from the dhams soon.
Yes.
But yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, apologies in advance because I do have a sore throat. But yeah, Maharaj can serve the Srimad Bhagavatam in his state when he was still leaving his body, and in the last few weeks, then I can tolerate a bit of a sore throat, Right. Thank you. So if we just do a quick recap of how we got to this verse. So in the previous chapter, we heard about the glorious birth and appearance of Maharaj Parikshit, how Yudhishthira Maharaj wanted to perform some horse sacrifices also, right, to become free from the sins that he incurred, or that he thought he was incurring from the Kurukshetra war. And in that way, he wanted to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then at the end of the last chapter, we saw how Krishna was just about to leave Dwarka after he had attended the sacrifices, after he had just stayed for some time with the Hastinapur Vasis after the sacrifice, just to please the relatives. And then in this chapter, chapter 13, we switch our attention from the Pandavas to Vidura, and how Vidura is now coming back home after his pilgrimage, where in his pilgrimage he had a very nice, elaborate conversation and discussion with Maitreya Rishi. And that discussion wasn't about the politics of the world or this, that, and the other. It was about transcendental knowledge. It was about knowledge which would be everlasting and eternally beneficial for all. And we see in the latter verses how Vidura was a very cherished personality, how all the residents of the palace, whether it was Dhritarashtra, his brother, or his nephews, or the other personalities within the palace, they were all really happy and joyous to see Vidura when he had come. And they were just preparing Vidura to give him a nice place to sit, giving him a nice meal, and all these different things that we do when a great personality comes home. And once Vidura was becoming comfortable, what did they do? Well, Yudhishthira Maharaj started to inquire from Vidura. He started to inquire about, oh, tell us where you went. Tell us how you maintained yourself. Tell us about where and who you rendered service to. And specifically, we see Yudhishthira Maharaj is leading on to the idea of how Vidura's travels were in connection with Dwarka or with Krishna. We can see that Yudhishthira Maharaj clearly wanted to understand and hear about what was going on in Dwarka and what the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, was actually up to, what he was doing. So then we see that Vidura is starting to share a few things. He's starting to share about his pilgrim, and we don't necessarily have so much details in the verses, but Prabhupada mentions in the purports that Vidura is sharing all these things. But interestingly, Vidura shares many things from his pilgrim, but he doesn't share one thing. He doesn't share anything in relation to the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. It's mentioned that he didn't share this because Sa Karuno Dukitan Drashtum Akshama. Compassionate Mahatma Vidura could not stand to see the Pandavas distressed at any time. This is a symptom of great souls, actually, that they can't bear to see anyone in distress. Right? And in the last few days, leading up to today's verse, we see how Vidura had stayed in the palace, right? Not because he wanted material comforts, not because he was tired of his long journey, but because he stayed in the palace to rectify his brother's mentality, to rectify Dhritarashtra's mentality. In verse 17, we see that Sutta Goswami is giving us hints about this idea of how there's this time factor that gradually overcomes all those who are overly attached to family affairs and engrossed in family affairs and the thoughts about family. And then in yesterday's verse 18, we see how Vidura was telling Dhritarashtra, like, you should just leave immediately, right? And interestingly, we read that when Vidura was speaking to Dhritarashtra, actually everybody in the palace was present, right? Yudhishthira Maharaj was there, the other Pandavas were there, so many personalities were present. But Vidura was explicitly speaking to Dhritarashtra because of all the personalities. It was Dhritarashtra that was in that precarious position. He was in that position where he was staying in the palace out of his own illusion. We know the history where Dhritarashtra wanted to become king, and so much had happened where, okay, because he was blind, he didn't get the kingdom. So he tried to acquire the kingdom through his children. But even though so much had happened, even though the Pandavas went through the exile, his 100 sons acquired death, Dhritarashtra still didn't learn his lesson, and he still wanted to try and stay in the palace as a king, or if not as a king, then at least as the uncle of the king. And then we come to this verse, where Dhritarashtra is basically referred to as an old man, and then in this specific verse, Vidura is saying that this is a frightful situation, right, for Dhritarashtra. He explains that actually nobody can save oneself or save another person from death. Why? Because the Supreme Personality Godhead comes and approaches as Kal, as the eternal time factor. We know that the material body undergoes 6 transformations, right? Birth, existence, staying around for a while, then it goes through some growth, transformation, whether it's transformation of the body or children in form of byproducts. Then it dwindles, it becomes old, and then ultimately we acquire the final stage, which is death, right? Where the end of life has come. And we can try as much as we want, but we can't stop that cycle. The best we can do is try and slow it down through, say, cosmetics. That's one thing. Although it's more of an external representation, we're not slowing the cycle down at all, right? Cosmetics, something like that. Or the other extreme we can go is just speed the cycle up, right? Abortions or things like murder, right? Or even just taking harmful intoxications, right? Alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, or just harmful food products, things which are unhealthy. All these things can affect the speed of the cycle, but we can't do anything to stop the cycle itself. But actually, when we look at the material world, this transformation, these 6 transformations, actually applies to everything material. It's not just the material body. If we look at the material industry, right, then we have something called a life cycle assessment, where there are 6 phases, 6 stages for a material also. There's the extraction phase, where we're extracting the materials, the raw materials from Mother Earth. Then we process them. Then we create something out of them. We manufacture products out of them. Then we distribute, right? We take them in trucks, ships, cargo, and we take them to the shops and all these things. Then we undergo this idea of using them, using products, using our phones, using the laptop, using all these different things. And then ultimately, when the product is no longer of use to us, we go through the waste management cycle, which is its end of life. So everything has a certain time span, right? Everything material has a certain time span. And in due course of time, that time span, that cycle means that ultimately it comes to the end stage. It comes to the stage of death. And after all, mrityu sarva harashchaham, right? Krishna says that he is all devouring death. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says that. But there's one thing that doesn't undergo any transformation, right? And that one thing we understand is the soul. In the Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 7, it's mentioned, Janmadya Shad ime bhava drishtadrehasya natmanaha alanamiva vrikshasya kalineshvara murtina. Translation. Just as the fruits and flowers of a tree in due course of time undergo 6 changes, birth, existence, growth, transformation, dwindling, and then death, the material body which is obtained by the spirit soul under different circumstances undergoes similar changes. However, there are no such changes for the spirit soul. From the Bhagavad Gita, we also know Ajo Nitya Shashvato Yam Purano, right? For the soul, which is unborn, it's eternal, it's ever existing, it's primeval, right? So unlike the fruits and the flowers on a tree, which undergo so many changes due to the cycle of the seasons, right? Sometimes they will grow, sometimes they'll become a bit dry, then brown, and then they'll fall off, and then undergo that cycle again. But unlike the fruits and the flowers, the soul, we actually a lot like the tree, who stands strong through all the seasonal changes, through all the ups and downs, through all the external changes that go on around us, right? Living in the material world, our soul is actually forced to accept these material bodies. But first and foremost, we have to understand that the body is a means by which the soul acts out its desires. Right? We have to come to the consciousness that I'm not this body, I'm a spirit soul. The spirit soul is the one that has the desires, and the body is a means to act out those desires. We have to understand that the body is an external feature of the soul, right? The soul isn't dependent on the body, it's the body that's dependent on the soul. And if we truly understand that I'm a spirit soul, I'm not this body isn't me, the more we understand and identify ourselves separately from the body, then we become less anxious to maintain the body. We become less anxious to over endeavor to look after the body, right? Because we know that no matter what I do, the body, because it's material, has to undergo 6 transformations, right? And no matter what I do, the body has to go through Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. It has to undergo birth, death, disease, and old age. We can do whatever we want, but we know, and the more we identify ourselves as the soul, we understand that that is the nature of the material body. And when we understand that, then we become less attached to the idea of looking after and maintaining the body. But the funny thing is that when we pay attention to our material body, then we'll notice that the material body gives us more pain, more anxiety, actually, right? And we can notice the classic example is a child, right? Say a child is going to the hospital for their polio vaccination or injections, right? A small baby. What usually happens, they see the needle, and even if the needle's not even come close to them, what they do, they start crying, like, oh, you know, it's hurting, right? But it's not even touched them yet. It's not even pricked them. But equally, if the child is preoccupied, like say the father, the mother, or the nurse is playing around or cracking jokes, you know, just making the child's attention diverted away from the injection could come, go, and they wouldn't even notice, right? Or similarly, we could think of it for ourselves. We could be in the busiest of cities, right in the middle. We could be in the busiest of trains, right in the middle. But if our mind is preoccupied and absorbed in some other thought, then we're oblivious to where we are a lot of the times. We're oblivious to what is going on around us. So if we're giving so much importance to our material body, then what's going to happen? We're going to give more importance to the anxieties and the distress, to the health, to the wealth, to the jobs, to the family, which is all associated to the body, right? And the more conscious attention that we give all these things that are pertaining to the material body, the more they cause us trouble, right? But as devotees, we need to realize that we're not this body, we're a spirit soul. We hear it all the time. Prabhupada mentions it in practically every other lecture. But the reality is that to the degree that we understand that, to the degree that we've actually realized that we're not this body, we're a spirit soul, to that degree we'd prioritize our spiritual life more. As devotees, we're meant to utilize our time to serve the Lord. As devotees, we're meant to properly give our first and foremost attention to our spiritual development. And eventually, when it comes to, when time comes to us in the form of death, then indeed it's very fearful for one who is very very much not in tune with the fact that they're a spirit soul and not the body. But for a devotee, death is not a reason to fear. We hear again in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhitam prapannam paripati yad sorry. For one who is afraid of death, they should simply take shelter of the Lord and they'll be protected. Why? Because mrityu death itself runs away in fear of the Lord. Everyone fears death, but death fears the Lord. So naturally, if we fear death, then we should take shelter of the Lord. Because if we take shelter of the Lord, when death comes to us, then death itself will run away in fear of the Lord. It's not that as a devotee, we don't quit this material body, right? It's not that. But as Prabhupada explains in one of the purports in Canto 8, quote, for one who surrenders to Krishna fully and who is protected by Krishna, the present body is his last. He will not again receive a material body to be subjected to death. This is assured in Bhagavad Gita 4.9. Tyaktva deham punarjanma neti mameti sa Arjuna. A devotee, after giving up his body, does not accept a material body, but returns home, back to Godhead. Unquote. This material body is actually full of so much struggle. Right? In Canto 11, the struggles, right, the miseries that we pertain to with the material body is actually elaborately explained in one of the verses. Translation. Within the material world, one's material body is always subject to birth and decay. Similarly, the life air, pran, is harassed by hunger and thirst. The mind is always anxious. The intelligence hankers for that which cannot be obtained. And all of these senses are ultimately exhausted by constant struggle in the material nature. Right? And we can see that's the nature of our material pangs, right? If we were to summarize our material life, our life in a nutshell, this is it, right? We're subject to birth and decay. Our life, because of hunger, because of thirst, and all these other necessities of the body, harass us. Our minds become anxious about all these things. Oh, this isn't happening, or that isn't happening, right? This person did this person did that. Why did they say this to me? And then our intelligence also is a cause of frustration for us. This shouldn't have happened this way. I want this to happen, so I'm going to plan how this is going to pan out. But ultimately, it all leads us to frustration. But the solution is also given in that same verse. Translation, a person who is not bewildered by the inevitable miseries of material existence and who remains aloof from them simply by remembering the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is to be considered Bhagavata Pradhana, the foremost devotee of the Lord. Unquote. So if we want to transcend death, right, we have to transcend the bodily identification. And that could be the gross material body, or it could be the conditioned subtle body in terms of the mind, the intelligence, or the false ego. And it's not that we wake up one day and go, yes, today I realize I'm a spirit soul, I'm not this body, right? To hell with the body and all its necessities. No, it's the process, right? But the fact is that as devotees, we have to commit ourselves to the process. We have to seriously endeavor along that process. Many times we will go, oh yes, I have all these material desires, let me focus on them at the same time as let me focus on my spiritual life. But what ends up happening? We end up prioritizing our material life for certain periods of time because that's not going well. And then we'll question like, oh, I'm not being a proper devotee, I'm not sincere enough, I'm not serious enough. Well, of course, because we're not prioritizing being a devotee then. We're prioritizing all of our other desires. But somehow we need to become fixed up in the thoughts of Krishna. And especially at the time of death, we need to assure ourselves that, yes, I am going to remember Krishna at the time of death. But the reality is that we can't remember Krishna at the time of death if we haven't cultivated that consciousness of Krishna throughout our life, right? Somehow we have to sincerely and seriously engage ourselves in devotional service. And that way we can realize in this life that we're not the body, we're a spirit soul. We have to sincerely dedicate ourselves to our 16 rounds of japa every day, right? Prabhupada said a minimum 16 rounds, right? So it's not that, oh yes, you know, it's 10 p.m., it's 11 p.m. It's okay, I've only got 3-4 rounds left. I'll do them and then I'm done for the day anyway. No, if we can, we should try and our 16 rounds in the morning, and then when it comes in the evening, at the nighttime, we should be like, okay, I've got nothing else to do. Let me chant some extra rounds, right? We should be reading and studying the Bhagavatam with rapt attention daily, right? We should be sincerely, with a humble attitude, serving the Vaishnavas. And it's only by doing all these things sincerely, seriously, and regularly, by daily practice, that we can actually come to a realization that we're not this body, we're a spirit soul. And Prabhupada's given this guarantee to us, right? We have so many examples in our movement alone, where we see that it's possible to elevate our consciousness from beyond the body. And the most recent we have is His Holiness Kanamakanam Maharaj. He lived such a illustrative life as a devotee. He gave his entire existence to serving the mission of Srila Prabhupada and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We heard in the memorial how he had helped save so many yatras, how he had helped protect and save so many temples, how he had brought so many local Africans to the movement, especially the South African Black congregation. How he had, his whole life after he had come to Krishna consciousness, dedicated himself to spreading the glories of the holy name in every town and village. And the best part is about Maharaj that if anybody had a reason, had an excuse to give up the process or question the process, it was Maharaj. He had so many issues in his life. He was shot in the line of service. He had had numerous health issues. He had pneumonia. He had a previous case of cancer, right? And whenever he took lots of responsibility, it's not that he would go to the devotees and say, I've got a lot going on, please don't give me more. And then they'd be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. He'd say that and he'd still get swamped with so much more service. But as a Vaishnava, he not only showed us how to live, but he also showed us how to leave, right? He left in Vrindavan Dham and he stayed there for the final months. But he didn't stay in Vrindavan Dham thinking, oh, you know, I need to go to Loy Bazaar for my sari or my dhotis. I should go to India. When I go to India, I'll go to Vrindavan. And because I'm going to Vrindavan, Loy Bazaar is right around the corner. No, he went to Vrindavan to focus on Krishna. That was his mission. That was his reason to go to Vrindavan. He went to Vrindavan to absorb himself in hearing and chanting about the glories of Krishna. And even when his body was starting to give him trouble, when moving the beads became tough, he simply chanted on the tongue. When chanting on the tongue became tough, he simply chanted in his mind, right? But always he was just constantly absorbing himself in hearing and chanting about the name, fame, the glories, the pastimes of Krishna. One way or another, he engaged himself in Kirtanya Sadahari. But all this was possible because it's not that he just engaged mindlessly in service throughout his life, right? Oftentimes we think that, okay, you know, I just need to engage myself in service. I just need to do service, just do service, just do service. Temple service, this event, this retreat, organizing this program, that program. He was doing all of that, but in the consciousness of, I'm doing this for Krishna and the Vaishnavas. And also he had his own personal time where he would absorb himself in focused chanting, in focused hearing and reading. It's not like us where we're thinking, oh, I've got so much going on in the day. I can't focus on my rounds. I can't focus on my hearing. I can't focus on my reading. I'll give, just 5 minutes a day, I'll dedicate to that. No. If we want to serve Krishna, if we want to serve the Vaishnavas, we have to, how do we serve somebody? It's by understanding who they are. If we connect with the personality, then we can serve them best. Right? So his chanting, his reading, talking about Govindam Maharaj, at the time of his passing, wasn't dry, right? It wasn't dry chanting, it wasn't dry listening, it wasn't dry reading. It was susukam kartumavyayam. It was everlasting, it was joyful, and it was joyfully performed. What was ours like? I have to do 16 rounds because I promised, because I'm initiated. Okay, I don't feel it, but that's fine, I'll just get my 16 rounds done. The classic finger comes out of the bead bag, sometimes with the phone, sometimes with the cutlery in the kitchen, sometimes with all these things that we have around us. And then when we're reading, it's like our phone, we go, okay, I'm not going to focus on my phone. I'm going to put my phone on vibrate, right? Usually it's on loud volume, but I'll put it on vibrate. And what happens? Who's texted me? I'm reading. I'm focused on my reading. Who's texted? Oh, okay, let me just check, We could put it on silent. We could put the phone in another room. We could turn the phone off, but we don't do it. Because actually we're pretending to focus on the reading, but actually we don't want to focus on the reading, we want to focus on the phone. So even though Maharaj was going through so much material anxiety, right? His material body was completely giving him so much misery. But we can see that Maharaj was able to give up his bodily identification. He was able to give up the bodily concept of life. And he was fully immersed in engaging himself in the real, in the correct identity that he has, which is Jivara Sarupa Hoy Krishna Nityada, being an internal servant of Krishna. And in that moment for Maharaj, that eternal service meant that he focused on his reading, on his chanting. For us who have able bodies, that might mean that, yes, for majority of the day, we focus on external services, right? In looking after deities at home, preparing and being ready with the family, giving them time in Krishna conscious ways, or doing some service for the temple, for our other projects that we have. But equally, we should focus on giving that time to our personal sadhana, to our personal bhajan, as Maharaj calls it. Because bhajan, the difference between sadhana and bhajan, as Maharaj calls it, is that sadhana is, yeah, it's a regulated practice. But bhajan is a meditative practice. It's a meditative regulative practice that we're actually absorbing our consciousness in there. We're becoming absorbed in that practice. So yes, for somebody like Dhritarashtra, who is very much absorbed in his bodily concept of life, very much absorbed in serving his own body, his family, his friends, his the society, his desires, right? Death is very frightful. But for one who's engrossed in identifying purely as the spirit soul, who's transcended the needs pertaining to the body, pertaining to the family, pertaining to the society, one who's able to see all with equal vision. For such a devotee, mrityu pradhavati, death itself will run away. And if we want to be engrossed in our identification of the spirit soul, we have to become absorbed in our devotional service to Krishna, not just engaging in karma kanda, which is doing some activity and offering it to Krishna, but actually engaging in the thought that I'm doing this for Krishna. One of my senior god brothers in a couple of maybe a month or two ago, had actually said a very nice thing in class. He said that being absorbed is a service. But in fact, I'd go as far as saying as being absorbed is the best service that we can do. Right? We might say that, yes, right? I'll absorb myself in hearing and chanting when I get old. Or when, like Parikshit Maharaj or Kadamkara Maharaj, I'm coming close to death. Right? But do we know when we're going to die? We could be sitting in our chairs right here, right now, and within moments, something could happen and we'd leave our body. Death is just around the corner. Death is creeping on our necks, ready to strangle us at any moment. And when we've not absorbed ourselves in the present, in the now, in the today, in what we're doing right now, right? Then what hope do we have? We can be like, oh, sorry, I don't have time to be absorbed in Krishna. I've got this thing going on. I've got that issue. I've got this friend. I've got that family issue. I need to do this for my family. But what hope do we have if we're just going to be absorbed in all these things and not be absorbed in Krishna? So we have a choice. We can either see Krishna at the time of death in his most fearful form, right, as death, or we can see Krishna in his most beautiful form, right, and live beyond this body, right, if we want to go back home. And if we want to do that, then we have to become absorbed internally and not just an external show, right? We as devotees often will say, like, oh yes, I'm so absorbed in my reading, Prabhu. It was so nice to read the Bhagavatam today. But actually, was it? Or well, are we just saying that we were absorbed in our reading, but actually we had like 50 other thoughts that came to mind, but we read one sentence in that half an hour that really hit us? We have to become absorbed in our reading and our chanting and our services. We have to be absorbed in seeing everything we do as being for Krishna and seeing Krishna in everything we do. And what happens when we get absorbed in Krishna consciousness? Right? If we become absorbed in Krishna, then at the time of passing, Krishna won't come to us in that fearful form of death. He'll come to us in a way. He'll come to us in that blackish blue form, cowherd boy form of Raj, with the lotus-shaped eyes, with a twinkle in the eyes from the jewels of tears of joy. Why joy? Because he's seeing us, right? We'll see that form with the shark-shaped earrings that he wears in the Damdarashtakam, right? A peacock feather with his golden dhoti, holding in his hands the flute that he kisses with his bimbo red lips. We'll see him skipping, we'll see him dancing, we'll see him running towards us with open arms, ready to embrace us like he does with Gopakumar. All because finally my devotee has come to me. So we have that choice. We can see Krishna at the time of death in that fearful form of death, or we can see Krishna in his most beautiful two-armed form that we see in the picture of him embracing Gopakumar and him coming to embrace us because we are as dear to Krishna as each and every one of his devotees. And as a final tribute to Kadamkara Maharaj, I'll end with an excerpt from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which describes the presence that and the influence that the Vaishnavas have even after they leave their body. Right? Many of us will have heard this or read this many times. Quote, he reasons ill who tells that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still in sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living try to spread the holy name around. Unquote. I shall end there. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for this wonderful class, especially for me because I haven't heard your class since a long time. So thank you for this nectar. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of various other devotees who have joined, and thank you very much for supporting and joining today. Dimple Mataji, Chasumati Mataji, Mayuri, Ramya, Raju. We have this class every day. So if you have the time, I know it's 5 o'clock in England at this time. Seema Thakur as well. So thank you very much for joining in. We will now open our session for questions and answers. And we can welcome the devotees who have joined today with chanting 3 Hari Bols. Thank you very much. Let us unmute and chant 3 Hari Bols and then open up with the questions. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Hari.
Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? Yes, Ramya Raju. Mataji, kindly unmute and ask your question. We can't hear your question.
Sorry, Mataji, my Zoom had an issue. Hare Krishna, everyone. And thanks for the lecture, Prabhu. So death is a very sensitive topic, right? Every day we don't foresee it. We live with the hope that tomorrow would be a better day. But thanks for the inputs from Bhagavatam. But this one question, the Kadamba Kanna Swami's example that you gave and similar other things, right? So we have to separate ourselves from the body and look that the soul is the eternal one and we are all going to leave the body one fine day. These are interesting inputs and being absorbed in the service, which is super important. But if you could give some practical things, right? Because I remember listening to Keshav Maharaj's lecture where in the ashram, they asked the monks to meditate upon death and see if you're going to die one day, how it's going to look like and who are all going to share their final comments and then recap on how you want to live the life. But there are dualities to it, right? I remember Maharaj also saying that think you may die tomorrow, chant like you're going to die tomorrow, but at the same time, you got to plan your life. So there is a dharma element to it as well. So when there are dualities like this, it becomes very difficult that we get carried away or tagged to both these sides. So if you could give some practical things that one should meditate upon in the normal grahastha life, so to say, because monks have that, 24/7 involvement in this bhakti, but I think we are entangled between both.
Are you saying that grihasthas can't engage 24/7 in bhakti? Because Krishna consciousness is defined as Krishna consciousness, not as Krishna activities for a reason. It's about the mentality that we have, right? A brahmachari could be, if they're pretending to be brahmacharis, they could be very much absorbed in thoughts about non-Krishna conscious stuff too. But it's just living in the ashram. But yeah, so sorry, I didn't want you to pick up.
Oh yeah, that's a good point as well. So irrespective of the ashram, so to say, even
Yeah.
like I said, maybe brahmacharis would find this problem, but more so my point is when you're so entangled within the material environment, right, your mind often fails to think that, you're going to die one day. So you become so ambitious. Let's take the professional environment, for example. So you want to go out and do this XYZ things, but we know we are all going to die one day, but that also makes you lose interest. So if we should start today to see death is inevitable and if we have to practice it, making sure that at the time of death, you can remember Krishna.
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? If you look at what Maharaj did throughout his whole life, he engaged in activity. It's not that he became a mendicant from day one. He engaged in activities. The difference is that because he was a brahmachari and sannyasi, all his activities were related to the movement. Yeah. Whereas us living in the Grahastha ashram will be saying that, okay, my activities aren't related to the movement because I go to work, I have to look after family, so on and so forth. But it comes to the consciousness, which is what I was mentioning, right? Maharaj's consciousness, whilst you're serving the mission, could still just be about, oh, I have to do this. It's my duty to do this. Or it could be a consciousness of, I'm doing this for Krishna. Oftentimes, and I've said this before in one of the classes, we'll pretend to do it for Krishna, but actually it's more for us. We're saying that I'm going to go to work, I'm going to get the next salary band because, you know, the more I earn, the more I can give to Krishna. But what ends up happening, the more we earn, the more gadgets come home, the more, you know, sofas, the more expensive sofa, the TV, the, I don't know, what's the thing called? Like Alexa comes home, all these things come home that aren't really conducive to our Krishna consciousness. So that's the one thing, it's the consciousness aspect. So then it comes to, okay, preparing for death versus engaging in activities, right? Maharaj had shared this in the Brahmacharya ashram when he was sharing about Jankanath Prabhu, actually. Jankanath Prabhu, if you look at his life, right, Jankanath Prabhu is a monk from the manor who had left his body because of cancer also. When you look at his life, he actually had many dualities. He was so fixed up about doing things for the movement, right? And he kept, like, he did so much to try and keep living as long as he could because he enjoyed life. He would go through all sorts of ordeals. But at the same time, if you asked him, are you not scared of death? He'd be like, no, I'm ready for it. He's ready to die, but at the same time, he's endeavoring to not die. Because the idea is that his consciousness is about whether I die or not is not in my hand. But what I'm doing with my time is in my hand. So let me make the most of what I'm doing with my time and make it as Krishna conscious as possible, be in service for Krishna, so that my consciousness is for Krishna. But of course, there is that process whereby just as Govindam Maharaj says, from moment to moment, be a pure devotee. Sometimes we can't, right? Sometimes in this moment, I can't be a pure devotee. But take it moment to moment. Don't take it day by day or week by week or month by month. Take it moment to moment. In this moment, I'm going to engage myself in service, and this is what my service is. Next moment, exactly the same thought. Then where's the question of not thinking of Krishna? Because if we're meditating that moment to moment, I need to think about Krishna, then no matter what's happening externally, we might have by mistake committed the greatest sin, you know? But we have so many examples in the scriptures that the sinful become devotees, because it just takes that one pure devotional service that makes them into pure devotees. Sin is actually pious or impious, it's technically sin. Because sin is doing that which isn't aligned with Krishna's will. I know that went round in circles, but I don't know if that answers. But
Okay.
practical point, I guess, is from moment to moment, see what is my service to Krishna right now. It might be listening to the class. It might be whilst you're holding the bead bag, focus on that bead. 50 other thoughts come to mind, but that's not my service right now. It's my service later to think about them. But my service right now, because I've got my hand in my bead bag, is to think about the bead. Meditate on that bead. And then, yeah, chant like you're going to die tomorrow and read like you're going to live for decades, or I don't know what phrase Maharaj uses, but along those lines. Because actually, when you think about reading, your present service in reading is to be absorbed today whilst you're reading. And that means that you're going to read as if you've just got so much to take in because you're going to live for so many years. It's not about getting through all the books. It's about absorbing yourself in that passage that you're reading, that word that you're reading, that letter that you're reading right now. So if you think more of getting absorbed in what we're doing now and dovetailing that absorption to be for Krishna, that will naturally make us more Krishna conscious.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. And I also liked your example of meditating, that you are on your last, on your deathbed, and you are in so much pain or whatever condition you will be in, but you are seeing Krishna, and he's, you described how he looked, and his Kamal Nain, and his yellow dhoti, and the flute with him. And sorry. So I think that will help us. For me, probably that would be a practical tip from you on meditating on Krishna at the last minute. We have
Thank-
another question from Dimple Mataji. Kindly unmute. Hare Krishna Mataji, Danvat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, and thank you so much for a very powerful class. I just had a question around, I was contemplating on what you said about the cycle of the body, it's inevitable, and death. And these are strong messages which we shouldn't forget, because life is short and we don't know what's going to happen next. So absorption is really key in the mood of our service. But I'm also thinking that, as we go deeper, sometimes too much focus on that leads to us not having so much joy in Krishna consciousness, because it can be a little heavy to just always focus on those aspects. Can you share your thoughts a little bit about, how we bring in also that joyful light element into our service and our practice?
Okay, so how do we bring in joy in our services? Well, one thing is, if we think of any relationship, where's the joy? The joy is in developing the relationship. As part of that relationship, you might talk. That's one external manifestation of the relationship. You might, I guess we've got the 6 loving exchanges, right? From the nectar of instruction. You might exchange gifts. You might share your mind. You might listen to their mind. You might exchange prasadam, or do many, many different things in that. And it's that loving exchange aspect that actually brings us joy in relationships. So now it comes to, okay, when I'm doing my School of Bhakti service, or when I'm doing this preparation for a retreat, or this, that, and the other, where's the relationship element? Well, anytime we're doing something, we have a consciousness for why we're doing it. When you're engaging in work, you've got the immediate consciousness, which is that, oh, I need to do this. I need to get this document ready because that's my job right now. That's my duty right now. But what's giving you the motivation to keep doing it is because you know that at the end of the month, you're going to get your paycheck. And with that paycheck, you get to do all these other things that you want to do. But with service, you don't get a physical paycheck from it. But what you get is a deepening of the relationship with Krishna. But how can we realize that our relationship with Krishna is deepening if we don't know or establish our relationship with Krishna? And that establishing of the relationship with Krishna comes from knowing who Krishna is, knowing our relationship with Krishna, which means reading, chanting, hearing, our sadhana practice, our bhajan practice. So when we're engaging in sadhana in our practice, oftentimes most devotees will find it quite a lot more enjoyable, because it's like, okay, I'm reading about Krishna, I'm hearing about Krishna. Chanting, maybe not so much, I think most devotees will probably attest to chanting being a bit more difficult. But with external services, we engage with so many other devotees that it feels more purificatory than it does to bring in that joy. But if we focus so much on the manifestation of the results of the service, then instead of enjoying the service as service, we're trying to get something out of the service, which naturally will give us frustration, would naturally make us less joyful. But if we're engaging in the service because this is service for Krishna, then that relationship element helps make that service naturally enjoyable to the degree that we enjoy our relationship with Krishna. That's what comes to mind. But I don't know if other devotees have other thoughts on that.
Thank you.
So I guess to summarize, to me, it boils down to how deep of a relationship are we enjoying and looking to relish with Krishna. To that degree, we can see Krishna in our services, and that way we can enjoy the service because we know who we're doing it for.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Panchali Mataji, kindly unmute and give us your comments or questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, thank you for the wonderful class as always. And just on the last question on enjoyment and how do we realize it, so as you and Dimple Mataji, as you were discussing, I think what I tend to do, and I'm not too sure if that's actually a right way of doing things or not, but I just ask myself the question, so if I'm cooking for Krishna, is Krishna going to be happy with the taste of my cooking? If I'm giving flowers to Krishna, is Krishna happy with the colors of the flowers? So I keep asking these questions to me, and I keep imagining that, you know, is Krishna smiling? Is he happy? Is he unhappy? Is this silly things which you would not want to share with others, but because it's Krishna and nobody's hearing you, and he would know anyway what's going through your mind, you can ask him any single silly questions. So I tend to ask all those silly questions to Krishna, just to figure out to myself, is he actually happy with what I'm doing? I try to give the answer to myself. And sometimes I say to myself, yes, okay, I think he is probably happy because it's a nice color of the flowers, or you know, if I taste the prasadam after I've offered it to Krishna, and I kind of tell myself that maybe he did enjoy the food today. So these are the kind of things which I try to do to focus on the enjoyment aspect of Krishna consciousness, because as Dimple Mataji rightly said, there are, I mean, what you talked about today, Prabhuji, about the cycle of life and death, they are the absolute truth of life, and they are quite heavy topics, and we despite the fact we know that they are the truth, the absolute truths, we don't want to focus on them all the time. So how can we actually focus on the lighter side of Krishna consciousness? For me, it's just asking silly questions to Krishna himself.
Thank you,
That's
Bhaja.
really sweet. Sorry, but that's so sweet. Thank you for sharing that as well. That's really nice.
I think Panchali Mataji forgot that this is recording, because she said that she doesn't share with others, but she shared with everyone's group.
Gosh, Prabhuji, well, my secret's out now.
No, but you can see there that it's dependent on your relationship with Krishna there, right? Because you feel so affectionately towards Krishna, you're able to find joy in Krishna's joy. But imagine it's somebody you hate, right? Hate is a strong word, but imagine if it's somebody you hate and you're going, will they enjoy it? You're not going to relish the idea of them enjoying it. So to the degree that we develop our relationship with Krishna, to that degree we can enjoy, as Panchali Mataji was sharing, Krishna being happy from what we're doing. And it becomes less about me being happy, but more about the relationship and more about the opposite person in the relationship. Mother and children are like a prime example. Mothers sacrifice so much. They sacrifice their night's sleep. They sacrifice their own health. They sacrifice, if they're in a poor situation, they sacrifice their own food for the child. And it's not that they're kicking and throwing a hissy fit about it. They're happy, they're joyful about it because they know that the child is happy. The child doesn't realize that the mother sacrificed all this. And the mother also doesn't see it as a sacrifice. She just sees it as love for their child. So in one way, I mentioned this to a couple of devotees. In one way, developing love for Krishna is so much more easier in a female body because you naturally have that loving relationship, that loving affection. For us, Prabhu is majority of the time not a stereotype, but we're so hard-hearted a lot of the time that it's more difficult for us to relish the relationship. Yeah. So, yeah. That's my secret out.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. And thank you, Panchali Mataji, for sharing your secrets. I think that it is very important when you are building your relationship with Krishna.
I have nowhere to hide now, Mataji.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes, Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu.
I wanted to say, when I was younger in Krishna conscious, I wouldn't think the way I'm thinking now. I am a much older person now, but my focus is automatically now 100% on my journey ahead. So my soul's journey ahead. So I think this is something that just comes natural with age. So I would, as younger people, having the lighter side, enjoying Krishna prayers and all of that, I think that's very, very important now. And because it is something that will just come automatic later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji, for that input. I know we have exhausted our time. Any last questions or comments? Okay, can I request Arya Govind Prabhu?
Can I just make one comment?
Yes, yes, sure, Prabhu.
So, yeah, just to clarify, the focus wasn't on so much on we need to think about death all the time. The focus was on we need to think about Krishna all the time. And yeah, that could be Krishna in the form of trying to enjoy the process, enjoy the services, and go deeper in that. It could be, it's more about just getting absorbed in the service to Krishna as opposed to seeing some future philosophical thing and being scared that death is around the corner kind of thing. But that helps us also be more serious and fixed up. So I just wanted to clarify that, just because some of the questions were leading more towards, okay, that was the hard truth, now switch it up, Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for that clarification. Arya Govind Prabhu, are you able to end this session for us today?
Thank you. Thank you, Mataji. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for this wonderful session and this, lot of question and answers, and then a lot of points coming out today about time management and about the imminent death, what we are all facing, and then we don't know when that moment is going to come. And I was just remembering one story about the focus when Narada Muni wanted to find a greatest devotee. Then Krishna pointed out to some small farmer who was doing his duties, and then he was putting a pot of water on his head, and then he was, doing his own things in the farm. And Narada Muni thought, okay, what's so great about it? This is nothing so great about it. So he thought, okay, I can also do it. Then he put the pot of water, and then he was doing the same things as the farmer was doing, but he forgot to remember Krishna or chant Krishna's names. So I was focusing on the pot of water. So that is the focus. What we all lack, moment to moment, as Bhaja Govindam Prabhu was saying, that moment to moment, and then second to second, hour to hour, day to day. So our focus should be on Krishna's, names, Krishna's forms, and Krishna's pastimes. But as we are all living in this material world, and then living in this present day, where it's very difficult to focus, and we are as karmis and as developing devotees, we are we are working in a material world, and then it's very very difficult to focus. The devotee association is like this. These sanghas are very, very crucial to bring us back on track, and then keep us focused. So that's what I wanted to just share. Thank you so much, Prabhu, again for this wonderful session. Many wonderful points covered, and we take note of all these points, and then we try to imbibe all these things into our lives. Thank you, Prabhu. I request all the devotees to unmute and chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra once in glorification of His grace, Bhaja Govinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Pancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyo patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His Grace Bhaja Govindam Prabhu ki jai.
ISKCON Eldred ki jai.
Jai. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.